So yeah, we're going to hear some of the story of the Samanyalapala Sutta now. So we're going to start by casting our mind back 2,600 years ago to the time of the Buddha. So we'll go back 2,600 years to the time of the Buddha, to the kingdom of Rajagaha. So we're going back to the court of King Ajatasattu. So this is the main person in this story, is King Ajatasattu. So we're going to learn quite a lot about King Ajatasattu. So in Rajagaha with King Ajatasattu, and he lives in this beautiful palace. So he's living in this huge palace. He's a very wealthy ruler of the kingdom, and he lives in this huge palace. It's a beautiful palace as well, and the moon is shining through. So he's got this big window with the moon shining through, and he's kind of commenting on how beautiful the evening is. He notices how beautiful the evening is, but he can't enjoy it. So he kind of comments on, wow, the moon is shining through, what a beautiful evening, but there's trouble in my soul, I can't enjoy this. So the palace, and although the palace is beautiful, it's a dark and unhappy place, full of suspicion and paranoia. And the king himself is miserable and full of guilt. And the reason the king feels guilty is because to become ruler, to become king himself, he imprisoned his own father. So his father was king before him, but he imprisoned him and left him there until he died. So this is how King Ajatasattu became ruler. And because of this, he's full of guilt. And he can't relax, he can't be at peace, and he can't enjoy the beautiful palace that he's in. And out of this misery, he's been trying to find some way to find peace. He's been trying to find some way to let his mind be at ease, to ease his conscience. And he's been going to see different holy people looking for their advice. So he's been going to lots of different teachers, trying to get help to know how to ease his conscience. And out of... this is another evening where he's doing this, and he's asking the people around him, what should I do? Who should I go and see? Who can I go and see that will help me know what to do? And he's already seen 6 of these teachers, so he's already been to lots of them. And as he says this, people around him say, oh, why don't you go and see this person? Why don't you go and see this person? And every time, either he's been to see them or he just knows it isn't going to work. So he's kind of like in despair, like, how am I ever going to feel better in this state? And he asks his friend, so he's got a doctor called Jivaka, and he asks Jivaka, what should I do? What should I do to help? Where could I go? And Jivaka was a disciple of the Buddha, and Jivaka knew that the Buddha was staying in a forest nearby with a group of monks. And he suggested that the king pays the Buddha a visit on full moon night when the monks are gathered. So traditionally what happened at the time of the Buddha was, on a full moon, all of the monks from the area would gather together for one evening around the Buddha, and they'd practice together and listen to the Buddha teach. And Jivaka knew this, and he suggested to the king, why don't you go on a full moon night and see the Buddha? And the king feels, for some reason, the king resonates with this suggestion. And he was suggested lots of the other teachers, he suggested all of these different people he'd go see. But for some reason, when Jivaka suggested the Buddha, there was a resonance and there was a response. And the Buddha knew that this is what he needed to do. And so he sets out to the forest. He sets out and goes into the forest in search of the Buddha. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave the story for now. We'll pick up the rest of it after the break. So we've met King Ajatasattu, and he's preparing to set out to the forest to see the Buddha. And one of the other things we're going to be exploring tonight is the image of the forest, the image of kind of going forth into the forest. And the forest, well, we could see the forest as a symbol. We could see it as a symbol for the spiritual life. And symbols are something, they're an image that are pointing to a deeper truth. So they're different from, there's kind of, we can define them, there's signs and there's symbols. And symbols are something that point to something much deeper. They're kind of multifaceted. and they point to something mysterious and slightly intangible, but something that we can feel in response to. And because they're multi-layered, they can mean different things, and we can draw out different responses to them. And all through the Buddhist tradition, there are lots of these symbols that kind of speak to us on different levels, and we can kind of draw out different truths from them. And yeah, we'll never exhaust the meaning of a symbol. There's kind of endless depths that we can draw out of symbols. And they're universal, and they reappear throughout time in different cultures, and in different ways, in different stories, myths, fairy tales, etc. And yeah, in the Buddhist tradition, there's a strong kind of emphasis on going forth into the forest. And historically, that is what happened. The Buddha said that's a good place to meditate, go forth and meditate in the forest. But also there's a symbolic truth to it as well. There's something symbolic about going forth into the forest. So what we're going to do is just now we're going to get into threes, and just talk about when you bring a forest to mind, when you bring to mind the image of a forest, and the idea of going forth into the forest, what does that conjure up for you? What's your response to that? And like I said, with symbols, there's so many different aspects that we can draw out, so there's no kind of right or wrong. But just when you think of going forth into the forest, and just forest in general, what do they bring up? So we started off by meeting a king called King Ajasattu. He was living in this beautiful palace, but he couldn't enjoy it. He couldn't enjoy his wealth in his palace because of his guilt, basically. He had a guilty conscience from the fact that he usurped his father, put him in prison, and then his father died. So we've got this king living in this beautiful palace, but he just can't be at peace. He can't be at peace because of what he did to his father. And then he spoke to people around him saying, what should I do? Who could I go and see that will be able to help me with this problem? And they all suggested all of these different people, and lots of them he'd already been to see, so he just knew, this isn't going to work. But then his friend Jivaka, who was his doctor, suggested to him, why don't you go and see the Buddha? Jivaka was a disciple of the Buddha, and he knew that the Buddha was nearby, and he said, why don't you go and see the Buddha? And then for some reason, King Ajasattu had a response to that. He had a resonance with the suggestion that why don't you go and see the Buddha? And that's what he decided to do. So where we left it in the first half, we left King Ajasattu preparing to go forth into the forest. Yeah, and then we discussed about the image of the forest. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at is the image of the forest, and kind of a symbol. We could think of it as like a spiritual symbol that can speak to us about our life, and about kind of it's an image for spiritual life basically, but I'll unpack it more. So that was where we left it. So the king was suggested, why don't you go and see the Buddha? And he's decided, I'm going to go and do that. I'm going to go to the forest on the full moon night, and go and find the Buddha, where he's gathered with all of his a big group of monks. So what the king then does is he thinks, I know, if I'm going into the forest, what I need to do, I need to get all my elephants, I need to get all of my servants, and we're all going to gather together, and we're going to go into the forest. So it's said that he has 500 elephants, 500 servants. He kind of dresses them all up. It's said that he had his tusker, which I didn't know what that was, but I quite liked it as a job title. So he's got his tusker that's presumably in charge of the elephants, kind of leading the way, with him on the elephant at the front, kind of all dressed up in its glory. And then they've got these 500 elephants all going to see the Buddha. And partly he'll be doing this for safety, because he's a very unpopular ruler. His father was a very popular ruler, and he's usurped him, so he's an unpopular ruler. So partly he does this for safety, but also it's a display of his power and wealth. So he's going to see the Buddha, but he wants to show how powerful he is, how wealthy he is. So he has this huge entourage with all of his elephants. And so they enter the forest. So he's got these 500 people on these 500 elephants. They've entered the forest, and they're going deeper and deeper and deeper into the forest. And as they go deeper and deeper into the forest, it gets more and more silent. So they're getting further and further away from the town, further and further away from his palace. getting quieter and quieter. And the king asks Jivaka, how many disciples did you say were with the Buddha? And he said, thousands, king, thousands of monks are with the Buddha. And as they go deeper and deeper, it's getting quieter and quieter. And the king just can't believe it. He can't believe how quiet it is in the forest. And he starts to suspect foul play. He starts to suspect that Jivaka might be leading him into a trap. And he says, Jivaka, are you playing a trick on me? Are you leading me into a trap? If there's over 1,000 monks, why can I not hear so much as a sneeze? It's completely silent. But Jivaka is a friend of the Buddha, the friend of the king. And the king trusts Jivaka, and he says, no, I'm not leading you into a trap. Just stay with it. The Buddha is here. We are going to find the Buddha. So he manages to allay the fears for long enough to the point where they enter a point where they can see a golden glow from a grove in the woods. So at the end they can see a golden glow in the forest. And at this point they have to dismount. At this point the king has to leave behind his elephants. He has to leave behind all of his hundreds of servants to go for this final bit of the journey. And they enter this small clearing where there's a great assembly of Buddhist wanderers, so Buddhist monks, completely silent, completely unmoving, in deep meditation. So they've entered this completely tranquil and silent area of Buddhists all practicing. And then facing the assembly is sat the Buddha, and he's glowing with a deep inner silence. You can kind of feel the radiance of the silence kind of radiating off the Buddha. And there's an atmosphere of complete peace in this gathering. As the king walks in, there's a feeling of complete peace. And surrounded by the atmosphere of concentration and loving kindness, the king finds himself feeling the most at ease he has for probably his whole life. He feels completely at ease. For the first time since betraying his father, his conscience is starting to ease. And he's so moved that he exclaims, I wish that my son might know the same peace that's here in this assembly. Yeah, so he's so moved by the peace, he wishes that his son could have the peace that's there now. Okay, and that's where we're going to leave the story. And we're going to kind of unpack the whole story and see why is that relevant to us? How is that relevant to us? What can we learn from that story? So we'll start. We'll go back to the beginning, and it starts with the king in his palace, and he's extremely unhappy. And the reason why the king's so unhappy, the reason why he can't be at peace, is because of his uneasy conscience. He can't relax. He can't be at peace, and the reason for that is because our peace of mind it relies on our actions. It relies on our actions being skillful. It relies on us to have done things that we're pleased with, that we don't feel uneasy about. So unskillful actions, actions that cause us harm and cause other people harm, they come back to bite us basically, especially in times of quiet where the mind starts to quieten down. We can be confronted by the mind that's come as a result of our unskillful actions. So if we've acted in selfish ways that have caused other people harm or caused ourselves harm, it's going to come back to get us. And we can try and block them out with distractions and busyness, but at some point we feel the results of our actions. I was talking to my friend the other day who he'd recently become a mitra, which basically means that you've said that I'm going to take up, I express publicly that I'm a Buddhist and I want to take up the basic Buddhist precepts. Now lots of you will have looked at that in the course you did, but they're basically precepts to say that we're going to act in ways, we're going to try and move in the direction of kindness, truthfulness, generosity, stillness and awareness. And he'd become a mitra where he publicly stated he was going to do that. And I was catching up with him and he was saying it's amazing what's happened since I've been trying to do that. Is that at the end of the week, I kind of look back on the week and I feel, oh yeah, that's been good. I've had a good week. And he said he didn't feel that before. Before he actively took up the trying to act ethically, before he took up the precepts, he was saying at the end of each week I'd feel uneasy. There'd be things that I wasn't happy with. There'd be things that I was conflicted about. But he'd noticed, just in the small time of thinking, oh, actually, this is how I want to act, at the end of the week, he noticed a difference. And he was saying, actually, by Sunday, I can look back on the week and I feel good about myself, which was a totally new thing. And I was just really, I was kind of moved by it, really, to see that have that effect that quickly. And that happens more and more. The more and more we try and act skillfully, the more and more we try to be ethical, that's what happens to our mind. We can start to relax, our conscience can start to ease. But the king can't do this. The king can't relax, and he can't be at ease because of what he's done. Because he murdered his father, he can't be at peace, and he's kind of reaping the consequences of that action. And one of the ways that we can see this is that he can't appreciate the beautiful palace. He can't appreciate the fact that he's surrounded by beauty, surrounded by this beautiful palace, this beautiful moon shining through, and he can just see, objectively he can see that it's beautiful, but he just can't appreciate it. And that's just because his experience is coloured by his negative emotions. And this is what happens to us as well. Our experiences are coloured by the mental states that we're inhabiting. So if we're in a positive state of mind, that colours our experience. And if we're in a negative state of mind, that colours our experience as well. So our perception is always being coloured by the mental state that we're in. I kind of noticed this I'll give a couple of examples. I noticed this quite strongly when I was living at a retreat centre for about 4 months. And then when I first got there, I found it so beautiful. It was just kind of nature and trees and so much peace, so much happiness. It was really beautiful. And then about halfway through, I broke up with my girlfriend at the time. Probably because I went on a 4-month retreat at a retreat centre, but there we go. And what I noticed was that everything suddenly looked grey. It was like all the beauty that I was seeing in the aftermath. It was like the week after. All the beauty that I was seeing kind of had the colour drained out of it, just because I was really unhappy, because I'd got into negative mental states. Like everything around me started looking grey, and I wasn't quite in touch with the beauty of it anymore, just because I was sad. And that was quite a strong experience of like, oh, I can see how my mind is colouring the world. And then as the months passed, and as I kind of got my positive mental states back, everything came back to colour. It was like everything went full colour again. So that was, for me, that was quite a strong experience of seeing how the state of the mind that I was inhabiting was colouring how I was seeing the world. And again, I was on a long retreat. When we get ordained, we go on a long retreat up a mountain, basically. And then every day I'd go and look at this beautiful view of the mountain. And even though I was seeing the same thing every day, it was so noticeable how kind of it reflected back my mental state. So if there were times in the retreat that I was finding challenging, kind of it would reflect that back at me as kind of it wouldn't be such a beautiful view. But that if there were times where my mind was really bright and really alive, it was just the most stunning view I could imagine. And it was really helpful to just see so clearly, kind of every day for weeks on end, just looking at the same view and just seeing how the mind colours that. So that's something we can be on the lookout for, because the problem is that a lot of the time we take the way we see things as the way things are, and we don't notice how our mental state is colouring it. But the more we can be aware that our mental state colours our experience, the more we can start to kind of create a bit of distance and start to see things more clearly, and use our experience as kind of a mirror for the state of mind that we're in. So we can kind of notice if we're in negative mental states by seeing how we're perceiving things. So that's how we find him to start off with. He's in a despair, wanting to find a way out of his despair. So what he does is he wants to find a holy person. He wants to find someone that will teach him how to be at peace in the world. He has an urge to kind of find a deeper truth, a deeper way of being, a truth that will satisfy him, and he wants to find that. And his friend Jivaka suggests to him, why don't you go and see the Buddha? He says, why don't you go and see the Buddha on a full moon night when he's assembling with his monks? And upon hearing this, the king, he knows this is what he needs to do. Now, I think this is interesting because when other teachers were suggested, he just wasn't interested. He's kind of like, no, I've been there, done that. I know that isn't going to work. But with the Buddha, it's as if he had like an intuitive response that this is something I need to move towards. There was something in him that really resonated. His intuition resonated with the suggestion of the Buddha, and he knew that this is what he needed to do. And we'll get this sometimes when we encounter something, we can have this kind of strong, what we sometimes refer to as like a gut instinct, don't we? It's kind of, we have this gut instinct for something. And I think what this is referring to is this intuition. We have this intuitive response towards things. And we can't always explain why. Sometimes when we have an intuitive response to it, we won't be able to explain why it's happening, and we'll just be having the response. And it can be like there's a deeper wisdom, there's a layer of wisdom to our experience that we can't explain that responds to things. And if we can learn to tune in with that and learn to follow it, it can guide us. So this is how the king experiences the call to go forth into the forest. Like I said, we're going to be looking at this theme of going forth into the forest. And this is how the king experiences it. He hears about the Buddha and he thinks, oh, this is what I need to do. I need to go and find the Buddha in the forest. And the Buddha himself experienced this. The Buddha himself experienced a call to go forth. And he experienced it when he encountered old age, sickness and death. So that's the first time that he encountered these truths of suffering. And he had this urge, oh, I need to find a different way of being. He knew that what he was doing wasn't working, but he didn't know what he could do. But then he saw the wandering holy man. He saw someone that had left home in search for the truth. And again, he had this intuitive response. He had this kind of resonant response to the image of the holy man. It's not even said that he had a discussion with him. He just saw him. And there was such a strong intuitive response that he knew, this is what I need to do. I need to go and do what he did. Enough to completely put down his whole life and also take up the life of a wandering holy man. The Buddha went forth looking for the truth, and eventually he sat under the tree and meditated until the point where he gained enlightenment. And after that, he spent the rest of his days teaching other people to do that. He teaching other people the way to attain what he attained, to follow the path that he'd followed. And when he encountered people, he taught them. And some of those people also had that response. They had this intuitive response to the Buddha, either to his teachings or just to his being, to his presence. And they knew, this is what I need to do as well. This is what I want to do. They wanted to grow. They wanted to transform their minds in the direction of what they'd seen, in the vision that they'd seen in the Buddha. They wanted to move their life in that way. And when they said to the Buddha, I want to follow your path, I want to take up your teaching, what he did is he instructed them to go into the forest and meditate. Often that was his encouragement, was go forth and meditate. So he said, go to the forest, to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut. Sit down, fold your legs crosswise, set your body erect, and establish mindfulness in front of you. And that's basically him saying to them, go and find a quiet spot in the forest to meditate, and just do that. That's what you need to do. You need to go into the forest and take up a practice of meditation. And so we'll have all had an experience of this calling, you could say, or this response to something at some point. There's an inner urge that we kind of resonate with something with, and it might be an urge to grow, it might be an urge to be free from suffering, or it might be an urge to just be more than we habitually limit ourselves to be. And if we're lucky, when we have this urge, we'll meet something that resonates with this urge. We'll meet something that kind of answers that call. And for me, it was the first time I went on retreat. I kind of went on a 7-day retreat. It wasn't in Triratna at this point. But I went on this 7-day retreat, and I'd kind of been doing a lot of meditation. I'd been meditating by myself. It had a positive effect. And I kind of was like, oh, there must be more to this. I've heard about retreats. I'll go on a retreat. But at that point, meditation it definitely wasn't the center of my life. It was something I did, something I found value in, but it was definitely like a peripheral thing. But I went on this retreat. And at one point in the retreat, I was just sat down. It wasn't actually in meditation at this point, but I'd been doing a lot of meditation. I was sat down kind of just in nature again. There were kind of trees surrounding me. I think I was sat on a tree stump. And then out of kind of what felt like nowhere, I just had this deep sense of peace came from within. It was the first time I'd ever felt kind of a really deeply pleasurable and peaceful experience come from within. And I knew it had no relation to any external experience. I think up until that point, I'd always thought that external experiences were going to give me the feelings I wanted. But this was the first time I'd ever felt kind of an upwelling of peace that I knew had just come from within myself, due to the fact that I'd been doing a lot of meditation. And in that moment, I just knew, this is the most important thing. This is the thing that I need to put in the center of my life. And at this point, I had no idea how I was going to do that. There was no path laid out for how I was going to do that, but there was just this deep inner urge for that experience and for moving in that direction to be at the center of my life. And for me, that's definitely one of the moments in my life where I reflect back on and think, that was definitely kind of a calling. In a way, that was my calling to the forest. I didn't know what the forest was going to be, but there was just this strong urge to move towards that. But we'll have all have experienced these calls. We'll have all have experienced a call towards something. And I'd like us to get into threes now, and just explore, when have you experienced a call in your life? When have you had kind of an intuitive response to something that you knew you had to move towards? And maybe you could explain it, but maybe you couldn't. And yeah, just explore that together with kind of two others. Okay, great. So yeah, we've had, so we're with the king. He's had his call to the forest. But now he has to leave, basically. Now he has to leave his palace. And the first part of going forth into the forest, symbolically or literally, is leaving the world. Yeah, so we have to leave the world to go into the forest. So traditionally people would leave their town or their village to go into the forest. And the king had to leave his palace. So that was his habitual place of dwelling. And he had to go forth from his palace into the forest. And this is symbolic for leaving behind our worldly concerns of our everyday mind. So it's leaving the everyday mind that we inhabit in our day-to-day life. And so much of the time we're just wrapped up in trying to get what we want and trying to avoid what we don't want. If we look honestly at our day-to-day, that's mostly what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get the things we want and avoid the things we don't want. And so much of our energy is wrapped up in our career, in our hobbies, in our romantic ventures, that often we don't have much left for anything else. And that's just because we're in this game with the world of trying to get the things that give us pleasure, trying to get the things we want, and avoid all the things that bring us discomfort, bring us pain, and what we don't want. So by leaving the world, that's what we're leaving behind. We're leaving behind that mind that's always trying to manufacture things. And it also means leaving behind the persona that we normally present to the world. So we usually want to be seen in a certain way. So we put on an act, basically. We play a character. We have an idea of who we think we're supposed to be, how people expect us to be, how we want to be perceived. And that's who we are a lot of the time. And we all do it. There's nothing kind of wrong with doing it. But it's just when we're doing that, it leaves out part of us. So as we're going around playing the persona, we're leaving parts out. But entering into the forest, part of that is leaving that behind. But when the king first sets out on his journey, he still takes all of that. So he takes all of his elephants, his 500 elephants, his servants, his kind of royal robes, his banners. He takes all of that with him because he's still attached to being perceived in a certain way. He's still attached to his worldly status. So he's bringing all of that with him, even though he's going to see the Buddha. He's taking all of that with him because he wasn't ready to let go of it, basically. He wasn't ready to let go of being perceived in a certain way. He wasn't ready to let go of his habitual way of being. And so another way to think about it is he took his habits into the forest. So that's his habitual way of being, and he took his habits into the forest. And we all have habits that we've built up. In Buddhism, we refer to them as samskaras, which are kind of grooves of the mind, these grooves that we just habitually go down. And we all have these habits. Every person has these habits that we kind of naturally act out. And as we start to practice meditation, as we start to learn about Buddhism, get involved in a Buddhist community, inevitably these habits are going to come with us. Unfortunately, they will come with us. So it's helpful to kind of try and spot what our habits are and how we're bringing them into our spiritual life. So I think I'm going to list a few and you can see whether you resonate with them. I think I've resonated with kind of all of them, probably why I listed these ones. But kind of you can see which ones you resonate with and see if there's any, you can just think, are there any others? So one that I think a lot of us suffer from is kind of this intoxication with productivity and maximization. There's kind of this trend now of body hacking, isn't there, where it's kind of how can I get the most of my body? And we have this kind of drive for productivity and maximization. And if we start practicing Buddhism, I think it's really easy for this to come in and just be really obsessed with basically attainment and achievement and trying to squeeze the most out of every experience. So like every retreat, it's like, how am I going to get the most out of this retreat? How can I fine-tune everything to get the most out of it? And we can do that with individual meditations as well. And in a way, having a motivation to get the most out of what we're doing isn't a bad thing. But the problem is that it kind of, we can get overly graspy with it to the point where we get negative about it if it's not living up to our high standards. So we kind of need to spot if we have this tendency to try and overly maximize and be as productive as possible in our spiritual life. And the other end of this is laziness. So we've got that at one end. The other end is laziness, where basically we just won't be applying ourselves as much as we can. Spiritual life, meditation, work on our ethics involves effort. There's no way of getting around that. If we want to grow, we're going to need to make effort. And laziness, habitual laziness, can stop us doing that. It can make us take our foot off the gas. So in a way, we need to be on the lookout for laziness as well as over productivity and maximization. And we'll probably likely bounce between the two as well. We can go through periods of trying way too hard and then react and go through periods of doing nothing. So we can be on the lookout for both of them. But if we have a strong tendency to either of them, and we know that, then we can try and look out for that. Another one that I wanted to bring out was a tendency to see ourselves on the outside of things. Because I've noticed it a lot with people where if before they get involved in a spiritual community, they have a tendency to see themselves on the outside of things. It's so easy to bring that into when you're getting involved at the LBC, for example. If that's kind of the way that you're used to being, once you're here doing it, you can just kind of carry on seeing it that way, even if that's not true. I've had friends who kind of, I can see they've got loads of friends, loads of connections, they're really in the middle of things, but because they just have a view of seeing themselves on the outside of things, they don't notice all of the connections they have. And I think this is, especially as we live in a world that is a bit more isolated and a bit more compartmentalized, more and more people, I think, are having this view. And it's really good to kind of try and spot this and kind of actually question it. You could think like, oh, am I actually on the outside of things? If I look around, actually, is that true? Because a lot of the time, it's just a feeling. And then if we actually investigate it, if we actually unpick it, it's not true. So I think that's something I wanted to highlight. And again, so maybe similar, but the other end of the spectrum is always feeling like we need approval. Always feeling like we need validation and approval from other people. And if we start practicing Buddhism, if we start getting involved in the spiritual community, it's very easy start trying to find ways that people will approve of. There's all sorts of things you can do, like retreats, study groups, living in community, working team-based right livelihood. All of these things are really good things to do. I'm not saying don't do these things, but we just need to spot if there's if we have a tendency of wanting approval. We need to spot when that's kind of infecting things, because at the end of the day, if that's going on, there'll be a kickback. If we stop getting the approval, or people aren't congratulating me as much, there'll be a kickback. And again, this one's quite nuanced, so I'm not trying to say like don't do things just in case there's a need for approval. Like, if it's fine if it's there, but it's just something to be on the lookout for, and it's a habit that we can then bring into it. And the last one is just cynicism. For me, before I came along to the Buddhist Centre, I was just very cynical. I'd like picked up a cynical worldview. My humour was very cynical. My humour was very sarcastic. And it's easy to bring that into everything we do. But especially in a spiritual community where there's a vision of something bigger, there's a vision of something higher, a bigger, kind of vaster way of being. If we have a tendency towards cynicism, it's so easy to just kind of poo-poo it and just be a bit cynical and a bit dismissive. But if we can watch, if I know I have that tendency to be cynical, can I question that? Do I actually know if that's true? Do I actually know there's definitely not something more than I am right now? Do I know there's not something to, kind of, for example, ritual or friendship or things like that? So yeah, we can be on the lookout for cynicism. But yeah, that's not an exhaustive list, but we can ask ourselves, what habits do I know I have? What are my habitual way of seeing things, and what can I be on the lookout for when I'm in my spiritual life? So yeah, we have this persona that we kind of put on. We have these habits that we live out. But to get to the Buddha, the king had to leave his elephants and his entourage behind. He got to a point where he wasn't going to be able to take his elephants anymore. He wasn't going to be able to bring everyone with him, and he had to go forward alone. He had to dismount from his elephant and go forward alone. And as we get closer to the Buddha, as we get closer to the mind of the Buddha, we'll need to leave all of our attachments behind. We'll need to see through our habitual way of being if we want to continue growing. We'll need to let go of the need to be seen a certain way. And yeah, by entering into the forest as well, we'll need to let go of what we think society expects of us. There can be expectations of us that we kind of pick up kind of unconsciously. And the expectation is to kind of conform, basically. There's a normal way of doing things, and the expectation that we'll have picked up is an expectation to conform to those things. Even if this doesn't actually match with our values, even if it doesn't actually match with what we deeply want, it's easy to pick up these expectations. And by entering the forest, we'll be becoming what Buddhism calls more of an individual, more of a true individual. It's someone that's able to know their own values, stand on their own 2 feet, and do respond to their intuition in a full way, regardless of what other people are thinking of what they're doing. And this was mentioned in the beginning as well. I think a couple of people mentioned this when we were talking about the image of the forest. And I think the forest also represents a need to reconnect with the natural world. In our ordinary lives, especially in a city, we're very alienated from the natural world. We kind of have all of these big concrete blocks around us with roads, and the nature's it's lovely. Like Victoria Park is lovely, but it is manufactured. So in a way, we're very alienated from the natural world. But experiences of nature are really important, and they can bring us much closer to a feeling of a deeper peace. It puts us in touch with the natural order of things as well. Someone mentioned this, that in a city we can feel like we can control everything. In a way, in a city, we're the gods, aren't we? It's like we have control over everything. We have the central heating, we have the roofs, we have the lights. We can control all the things. But cities are an expression of the human mind. In a way, they're a reflection of the unenlightened mind. They're a reflection of a mind that's based on greed, hatred and delusion. If you look around, especially in London, you kind of see the things that stick out the most is Canary Wharf, isn't it? It's like that's an expression, that's a reflection of a mind that's basically based on greed. And we can see that reflected back in our cities, whereas nature is an expression of the natural order of things. It's an expression of kind of the way things are when untouched by the human mind. So you could see these, is one way of looking at it, but you could see these as images as well. You could see these as symbols. And in a way, the city is a symbol for an overly rational, utilitarian and manipulating way of being in the world. So overly rational, overly utilitarian, just thinking about what I can get from things, and manipulating in terms of like what can I get from everything. So that's the way we could see the city. And the forest represents a part of our mind that's much deeper, a much deeper level of our mind, that's much more vast and much more mysterious. It's the world of myths, it's the world of images, it's the world of symbols. And by entering the forest, by going deep into meditation, we're entering the world of imagination, we're entering the world of myths, and we're entering the world of symbols. And it's significant that all of the major incidents of the Buddha's life happened under a tree as well. If you look at the stories of the Buddha's life, all the major incidents happened by or underneath a tree. So he was born under a tree, he gained enlightenment under a tree, and he passed away under a tree. And in Buddhism, it's really important that we see the world as alive. Sanghadharin, who founded this movement, said that a world that isn't seen as alive is a world where enlightenment isn't possible. And that's really strong, isn't it? So he's saying that if we don't see the world as a place that's alive, if we don't see the world that's kind of alive and vital, we're not going to be able to attain enlightenment. So it's really important that we're in touch with nature as something that's alive, with the world as something that's alive. And kind of these experiences of seeing the world as much more alive are really important to be cultivating and reflecting on and remembering. So again, if we get into threes, and we can just talk about what experiences have you had of nature where the world just felt more alive, and that might be more in a natural environment, or it could even be in a city, but what experiences have you had where the world around you has just felt much more alive? So if you want to explore that with a couple of people around you now. We talked about being caught up in our worldly concerns, trying to present ourselves in a certain way, and being trapped by society's expectations, and also being alienated from the natural world. All of these things keep us on the surface of our mind. They keep us kind of like skirting on the surface level of our mind. Whereas entering the forest, we could see it as a metaphor for going deeply into the mind in meditation. So we're going into the deep mind of meditative experience. And as we enter the forest, we're going deeper and deeper into deeper levels of consciousness. So we begin to encounter parts of ourselves that are normally unconscious. So there's normally parts of mind that we're not aware of. And as we're going deeper and deeper into the forest in the metaphor, or deeper and deeper into meditation, we're encountering parts of ourselves, parts of our mind that we're not normally in touch with. And I like this image for it because in the forest you can only see a little way in front of you, can't you? If you look through the forest, it's kind of, because there's trees in the way of each other, you can't see that much further in the forest. You can only see a little bit in front of you. So in a way, when you go into the forest, you're entering the unknown. As you go through, you're entering the unknown. And it's the same in the spiritual life. It's the same as we start meditating. We're entering the unknown, and you can only ever really imagine just beyond where you are. So you can imagine, like we can all imagine ourselves being a little bit calmer, probably a little bit kinder, a little bit less reactive, a little bit less restless. We can kind of imagine like an incremental change. But there's no way that we can imagine what it would be like to have been practicing meditation for 5 more years, or 10 more years, or 20 years, or 30 years, or 50 years. We can't imagine, we can't conceive what our mind would be like if we did that far. So, and especially there's no way of imagining what it would be like to be a Buddha, of what it would be like to have the mind of a Buddha. All we can do is see a little bit away, a little bit ahead of where we are now. And in a way, we don't know what challenges we'll have to face. That's one part of it. We don't know what challenges we'll confront as we're working on our mind, what things we'll have to overcome. But also, we don't know what deep joys, what profound experiences we might have as we continue to practice. So as we practice, we're always entering the unknown. We're always going towards in a direction where we don't know what's beyond, just a little bit ahead of us. And all we can do is just take the next step. So although Buddhism has a huge vision for our potential, the best thing we can do is just keep practicing day to day, keep doing the next step, keep moving towards the little bit ahead of where we are. And then as we keep practicing year after year after year, if we look back, we'll realise we're much further in the forest, to keep the metaphor going. We'll realise that we've grown a lot. Just from doing that day-to-day practice, from just moving just beyond where we are. And yeah, as the king went through, eventually he was getting more and more scared. He had to confront the fact that he was scared. So as we go deeper into our mind, there might be parts of our mind that we're not familiar with. It can give rise to fear. And Jivaka allayed his fear, and in a way that's what we can, it's one of the importance of having friendship in the spiritual life, is to have other people to talk about with our experience. So as the going gets tough, as things get challenging, there's people around us that can remind us that actually, of a bigger perspective, things are going well. So he's entering and he's getting more scared, but Jivaka's there reminding him, oh no, it's fine. It's going to be okay, we're going towards the Buddha. And then finally they come across the clearing, and then he has to get down off his elephant, and he goes. And he comes across the Buddha and his disciples, and they're in this deep silence in the heart of the forest. They're in this grove in meditation, and then there's this deep silence, there's this deep stillness. And if we keep practicing, if we keep meditating, especially if we keep going on retreat and deepening our mind by putting ourselves in those conditions, we will have times where we will enter this clearing in the forest. We'll have times where we enter a still space in the depths of our mind. And we're not normally in touch with this part of our mind. In our day-to-day life, we're not going to be in touch with it. Our lives can be busy, they can be hectic, we can have lots of different things to do. But there is a way to put ourselves in conditions where we can get in touch with this deeper part of our mind that we're not normally in touch with. And when we are in touch with that, when we're in touch with that deeper stillness of our mind, it can feel like a coming home. It can feel like, yes, this is where I was supposed to be. This is the part of my mind where I feel most at home. And we can encounter the beauty of the mind. We can encounter the depth and the richness of the mind. Through going through the forest, through going into deeper into meditation, we can encounter this stillness. And then through going through the forest, through the journey of entering the forest, we'll have developed loads of positive qualities as well. We'll have developed more courage, we'll be more loving, we'll be more perceptive, we'll be more wise. We'll have developed all of these things through the journey through the forest, through going deeper into the forest. And we'll have become big enough to dwell in this space in the presence of the Buddha. And as King Ajatasattu had kind of got rid of all of the things that he was carrying with him, he got rid of all of the things that he was attached to, and he was able to be there with the Buddha in the stillness. And by going forth into the forest, that's what we can do as well. We can eventually find the peace, find the wisdom that's in the heart of the forest, where the Buddha is there dwelling. Yeah, so I'm going to leave that there for tonight. It's been really nice being here with you. And we'll continue this series next week with Padmavajra, who's a really experienced order member. He's been ordained for 49 years, and he's been teaching all of that time, and he's a really amazing teacher, and he's kind of rounding off our series of looking at stories from the Pali Canon. So do come and join us for that. But yeah, really nice to see you tonight, and I hope you have a good journey home.